Hello, my name is Nadia Tanova, and I am the owner of NHT Consulting. I'm partnering with the APIA Health Forum to bring you this video on how to begin city and state advocacy initiatives. I'm going to take you through a 4-step process to get your nonprofit organization started on city and state advocacy initiatives. By the end of this video, you'll have the tools for understanding the rules of nonprofits when engaging in advocacy. You'll also be prepared to hone in on your own advocacy issues, build an advocacy plan, and build the relationships necessary to be successful in this work. Let's get started. Step 1, understand the rules for nonprofits engaging in advocacy work. Nonprofits are absolutely allowed to engage in advocacy, and in fact have an important role to play in the advocacy field. Because nonprofits have a mission to serve their communities and are often trusted leaders that see issues that affect their communities firsthand, they have an important advocacy role to play. By uplifting community issues and voices, nonprofits can advocate for impactful changes. But to do this, you first need to know the rules for engaging in this work. Let's start by talking about the difference between advocating and lobbying. In order for work to be considered lobbying, it must meet 3 standards. First, you must be communicating with decision makers, like elected officials, their staff, and sometimes even voters in the case of ballot measures. Second, you must be speaking with those decision makers about specific and existing or potential legislation. And 3, you must be asking them to vote a specific way on that legislation. All 3 of these components must be included in your work before it's considered lobbying. If one of these components is not part of your work, then that work is considered advocacy. Let's look at an example of this. Let's imagine that there is proposed state legislation to expand healthcare coverage. If your organization meets with your state representative and asks them to vote in favor of this legislation, you have just engaged in lobbying. Now let's imagine that instead of meeting with your state representative to ask them to vote a certain way on a specific piece of legislation, you meet with them to discuss the issue of expanding healthcare coverage more generally. This time, when you meet with your elected official, you talk about how a lack of coverage impacts your community, and you share stories of the people you serve who are struggling with this issue. By educating the lawmaker and not asking them to support specific legislation, you have just engaged in advocacy. So why is this difference between advocacy and lobbying important? Well, there are different rules for these 2 activities. Nonprofits can advocate on behalf of issues as much as they'd like without having to report it to the IRS. While nonprofits are allowed to lobby, they can only use a certain amount of their budget towards lobbying work and should track those expenses, including staff time, for reporting purposes. There are 2 ways to track and report your lobbying expenses. The first is called an insubstantial part test. According to federal law, nonprofits can only devote an insubstantial part of their resources towards lobbying. Therefore, nonprofits measuring their lobbying work in this way should be able to prove that they only used an insubstantial part of their resources towards this work. According to the Alliance for Justice, many lawyers agree that nonprofits can safely designate 3 to 5% of their annual budget towards lobbying expenses. The second way to track and report lobbying expenses is called the 501h expenditure test. By utilizing this test, nonprofits are generally able to engage in more lobbying initiatives. According to the Alliance for Justice, the test defines a clear dollar amount that the nonprofit may spend on lobbying, and lobbying limits vary depending on the size of the organization's annual expenditures. To learn more about these tests and how to decipher if your work is lobbying or advocacy, please see the accompanying resource list. Step 2, get clear on the issues important to your community. One of the greatest strengths that a grassroots nonprofit organization has when engaging in city and state advocacy is the ability to elevate community voices and give faces to the issues impacting them. To be effective advocates, you should focus your advocacy work on specific issues that align with your mission and also align with the community's need. A great way to ensure that you are advocating on issues important to your community is to engage in a community listening process. You can be creative in how you design your listening process, but the main idea is to ensure that you talk with many people that your organization represents to find out the issues that are most impacting them. You could create a survey with a variety of issues that you are considering advocating for and that align with your mission, and ask clients to fill it out while waiting to receive services. You could also hold focus groups virtually or in person and ask community leaders, organizational members, etc., about the issues that are important to them. Town hall meetings are another great opportunity to ask participants what issues are important to them. You'll also want to ask your staff and board members to weigh in. They are often from the community or they have strong community ties and can provide invaluable information on which issues are most impacting the people that you serve. However you do it, what's important is that the people you will represent with your advocacy work have the opportunity to tell you what's important to them. You shouldn't assume that you already know the issues they care about. Step 3, do your research and create a plan. Once you have identified the issues that you will advocate on, it's time to do more in-depth research into those issues and the advocacy work already being done on them, if any. Start by researching who has jurisdiction over this issue. Is it a city issue, state issue, or both? What is the history around this issue? Has there been any recent legislation passed that impacts this issue? Are there other organizations or coalitions already advocating on this issue? What are some potential solutions that the city and/or state could enact that would make progress on this issue? These are all questions that you want to explore and use to make an advocacy plan. Your plan should include the issue, potential solutions to that issue, potential partners, and strategies that you want to employ, such as community education, grassroots organizing, petitions, etc. Be sure to use the accompanying advocacy research tool to guide this process. Please also reference the list of resources, which will link you to a sample advocacy plan. Step 4, build relationships. Advocacy depends on a network of relationships with your community, elected officials, and partner organizations. Being a trusted partner means that you're more likely to have a seat at the table to discuss issues with policymakers. Relationships take time to build, but you can start to get to know your elected officials by seeing who represents you at the city and state levels and reaching out to their offices. Ask for an initial meeting to introduce your organization. You don't need to start off by focusing on issues. You can simply start off by introducing your work and community and giving a general overview on the issues important to your organization. Also look at the elected officials who have been supportive on the issues you care about and reach out to their offices. They can become important allies in your work. Here, it would be appropriate to let them know that while you may not be located in their district, you do have a common interest on a specific issue. Another great way to get to know your elected officials is by inviting them to tour your center or attend one of your programs. Once you have an initial conversation with an elected official or staff member from their office, be sure to add them to your mailing lists and social media accounts so that they can stay updated on your work and get to know you better. If there are other nonprofit organizations advocating on the same issue, be sure to reach out to them as well to build a relationship. You can ask them for a meeting, letting them know that you care about similar issues. Ask them about their past and current work on this issue. Ask if there are any ways that you might be able to partner on efforts. Finally, if there is an existing coalition working on this issue, be sure to join it. Coalitions are a great way to enhance your advocacy work, as they often allow you to strategize in larger groups and can create more power behind your advocacy work. I hope that these 4 steps will serve as an effective guide for you to begin your city and state advocacy initiatives. Start by understanding the rules for nonprofits when engaging in this work. Then decide on the issues you'll advocate on by engaging your team and community in a listening process. Next, research your issues and create an advocacy plan. Finally, build relationships with elected officials and partners. To support you in the process, be sure to check out the accompanying resource list and research tool. Thank you for being a voice on the issues most impacting your community.